In recent years, semen retention has re-emerged as a compelling topic in discussions about masculinity, personal growth, and sexual discipline. Once an esoteric practice reserved for monks, yogis, and Taoist adepts, retention now circulates in podcasts, YouTube circles, and self-improvement communities. It is often framed as a secret to power, vitality, and self-mastery. But beyond the internal benefits men report, clarity, energy, focus, and purpose, there is another dimension to retention that deserves deeper exploration: the feminine response. What shifts in a woman's perception, behavior, and inner world when she is with a man who practices semen retention? How do women intuitively respond to a man who retains his life force and redirects his sexuality into purpose and presence rather than indulgence and escape? In this video, we will explore these questions not through the lens of dogma, but through the framework of instinct, psychology, energy, and relational dynamics, aiming to shed light on why a woman often feels something different around a man who retains, and what that feeling truly signifies. To begin, it's essential to recognize that women, like men, are biologically attuned to pick up signals of strength, weakness, sincerity, and intent. When a man practices semen retention, not as repression, but as preservation, his body stops losing essential minerals, hormones, and neurotransmitters. That retention leads to an increase in testosterone, but more importantly, it builds a subtle, inward pressure, a reservoir of potential energy. Women respond to this retention the way nature responds to a stabilized ecosystem, with receptivity. A man who has command over his impulses signals a kind of primal mastery. The feminine instinctively detects this, not because she consciously analyzes his habits, but because she perceives his rootedness, control, and heightened life force. Women are not attracted to retention itself. They are attracted to what retention creates, a clear signal of inner order in a world overflowing with chaos. Self-mastery is always attractive because it projects leadership, stability, and the capacity to protect and guide, not through domination, but through direction. At the heart of retention lies presence. A man who is constantly chasing release, through pornography, meaningless sex, or compulsive gratification, is rarely present. His attention is scattered because his energy is leaking. He sees the world through the lens of appetite rather than engagement. But a man who retains begins to transform hunger into awareness. He looks rather than consumes. He listens rather than reacts. He feels instead of constantly escaping into stimulation. Women notice this difference immediately. Presence is magnetic. It is the quality of simply being there, without internal desperation, without neediness, without an agenda. A man who practices semen retention often carries an unspoken attentiveness. His eyes do not roam. His nervous system is calmer. His gaze holds and perceives rather than invades or judges. This shift alone can soften a woman at the deepest levels, because presence is what the feminine yearns for. Not intensity for its own sake, but attention, a witnessing that affirms her existence and being. Energy flows where attention goes. A retained man's energy goes toward life, not just stimulus, and the feminine, being an embodiment of life itself, responds. One of the lesser discussed benefits of retention, and one of the most important for women, is emotional safety. Why? Because women do not feel safe with a man who is controlled by his desires. They do not feel safe with a man who cannot regulate his impulses. They do not feel safe with a man whose sexuality is random, externalized, or merely seeking relief. Retention cultivates sexual integrity. That integrity is not celibacy, it is direction. A retained man does not kill his sexual instinct, he holds it. That holding builds pressure, intensity, and a level of intentionality that permeates how he expresses touch, affection, and intimacy. His sexuality becomes a gift rather than an addiction. Women intuitively trust such a man because they know his desire is not indiscriminate. It is honed. This trust enables deeper intimacy. A woman feels freer to open emotionally and sexually to a man who she senses is not using her body to satisfy a compulsion, but who is meeting her for the sake of connection, elevation, and union. In retention, sex becomes an exchange, not an extraction. Women feel this, whether they can articulate it or not. In the language of polarity, when a man retains, his masculine essence becomes denser, more radiant, and more magnetic. Retention alone does not make you masculine. Your thoughts, purpose, and actions do that. But retention amplifies whatever masculine essence is already there. Women feel this amplification in the body. The retained man often becomes an anchor in a room. Women respond with softening, attraction, curiosity, and a heightened awareness. This is not a conscious decision. It is instinctive. A woman's feminine essence does not bloom in the presence of neutrality. It blooms in the presence of polarity. When a man carries sexual energy that is not leaking, but circulating, his energy becomes directional. Purpose starts to emanate from him like heat. This direction, this grounded polarity, creates a contrast through which the feminine can relax into her own natural state of openness and receptivity. A retained man does not need to play alpha. He simply embodies fullness. Masculinity becomes an energetic fact rather than a performance. There is something mysterious about a man who is not driven solely by sexual pursuit. He becomes unpredictable, not in behavior, but in dimension. When a man is not running after every thrill, every peak, every dopamine spike, he becomes interesting. His mind has space. His eyes have depth. His actions are not hurried, and his self-contained nature makes others curious. Women respond to this with intrigue. In a culture where many men are hypersexual, overexposed, and readily available, a retained man feels like a different archetype. The mystery is not fabricated. It comes naturally from a shift in energetic expression. One of the deepest feminine desires in intimacy is to unfold, slowly, consciously, passionately, inside the presence of a man whose depth she cannot easily reach. Retention naturally generates depth, not restrictive stoicism, but rich inner life. That inner world is what a woman senses, even in silence. The retained man's attention turns inward, and because of that, his presence expands outward. On an energetic level, semen retention is not merely the holding of a physical substance. It is the conservation of life force. That life force affects the aura, the voice, the posture, and even the scent of man. Energy that is not expelled becomes available for creativity, assertiveness, intuition, and magnetism. Women can pick up on this in ways that go beyond logic. They notice the difference in the way retained men walk, speak, and breathe. They notice the fuller tone in the voice, the stability in the lower body, the relaxed command of physical space. Energy is not something that needs to be proven. It is something that is felt. Some women describe it as a feeling of being drawn in, others as an unspoken respect or curiosity. Still others experience it as a low, slow buzz in the body, activation without pressure. This energetic overflow is not forceful, and it is not manipulative. It is simply the natural byproduct of a man refusing to diminish himself in the name of temporary pleasure. Perhaps the most powerful feminine response to semen retention is the return of the sacred. Retention is not about prudish avoidance. It is about sacred use. It is the recognition that sexual energy is creative energy, and to waste it is to dull one's participation in life. When a man treats his sexuality as sacred, women feel honored, not as objects, but as active partners in the mystery. A retained man does not fear sexuality, nor does he trivialize it. He moves with a sacred fire. He does not take, he offers. He does not run toward climax. He aims for connection. He does not hide from the power of his sexuality. He commands it. This shift opens doors to deeper, more conscious sexuality. Women feel safe to express themselves fully, knowing they are not being used as a disposable means of release. The feminine does not want to be consumed. It wants to be met. Retention creates that meeting. It is important to acknowledge that semen retention does not automatically make a man noble, enlightened, or emotionally mature. In fact, without a strong foundation, retention can inflate the ego. Some men use retention as a badge of superiority, a way to feel morally or spiritually above others. This creates arrogance rather than presence. Women can feel this too. There is a difference between a man who retains because he seeks alignment and a man who retains because he wants power over others. Retention is not a substitute for shadow work, empathy, or humility. A man may retain physically while remaining emotionally immature, sexually repressed, or energetic out of balance. In such cases, the feminine may feel repelled rather than attracted. Proper retention is not about accumulation, it's about circulation. It is not about hoarding power, it is about using it consciously. If retention leads to self-worship, women feel used. If retention leads to heartfulness, women feel respected. The distinction is everything. For women in relationships with retained men, a few things are important to know. First, retention does not mean disinterest or lack of desire. In fact, it often means heightened desire, just not the scattershot kind. Retained men may feel more passionate, more intentional, more available over time, not less. Second, retention is not about saying no to sex. It's about evolving sex. It's about extending connection, deepening arousal, and using sexual energy as fuel rather than losing it at every peak. Many women discover that sex with a retained man is slower, fuller, and more emotionally rich, not because he withholds, but because he builds. Third, women often find themselves emotionally and sexually awakened in the presence of retention, not because they're being coerced, but because they're being met. Just as men alchemize sexual energy through retention, women alchemize intimacy through receptivity. In this way, retention becomes a shared path, not a masculine project. Semen retention is not a magic trick. It is not a shortcut to power, and it is not a weapon to manipulate attraction. It is an ancient discipline rebuilt for a modern world that has forgotten the sacredness of energy. When practiced properly, retention changes a man's relationship to himself. It turns sexuality from compulsion to choice. It transforms instinct into intelligence, and it shifts attraction from performance to presence. Women respond to retained men not because the man is special, but because he is aligned. He is less concerned with being impressive and more concerned with being real. Such a man awakens the feminine, not with manipulation, but with integrity. Retention, then, becomes more than a practice. It becomes an embodied offering, a way of saying, I do not run from my nature. I master it. I do not abandon my power. I channel it. I do not use you to escape me. I meet you with all that I am. And in that meeting, the feminine recognizes the masculine, not as domination, but as devotion.